Hello, you wonderful people. So today's video, kind of want to get a little behind the scenes or kind of insight to certain things. This is going to be kind of me just talking about the podcast a little bit. In the past, I've kind of shown you my setup. It was kind of a short video showing you like how my whole podcast setup is and how I record said podcast. But I want to take time to kind of dive a little deeper into the whole process to let you know how things used to work and kind of explain how they work now. So initially, when I first started doing the podcast, I have my way of doing it, and it's kind of changed a little bit here and there, but at the same time it stayed the same. So my process originally was, hey, I'm gonna watch everything in a single night, take some notes of it, and then the next day, like the next morning or afternoon, whatever the case may be, when I have the free time, is to record said, podcast. I mean, initially I wanted to do videos for it, but then I quickly found out oh, that's kind of impossible with the way I want to do things. So I eventually switched it over to audio and everything. Audio only, I mean, and just giving it a title card and everything. But that was my main process of doing that. But eventually I stopped doing it like that, of doing it, recording it the next day, because I was always afraid I was going to forget things. Because at that time I would also check my notes. That is something I do too, like when I'm watching TV show. Typically I wait till the commercial breaks, but sometimes it's if there's something, I'm like, oh, because I like to leave notes for myself. I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Because I'll leave notes being like, oh, this is where I think the rest of the episode is going to go. And then later on, I'm like, oh man, I was totally wrong about that. I like to kind of lay out my predictions ahead of time and be like, oh, let's see whether anything comes from that or not. And so sometimes on occasion, I would check my notes. But even then, to me, it was it wasn't what I wanted it to be. So from that point on, I stopped doing it. I started to go, you know what? I'm going to change it up entirely and start treating it like the way I treat my videos and just talk free form off the top of my head, let my thoughts recap the episode a little bit, talk about, my thoughts on it at right off the top of my head without me really having to read my notes. I mean, I'd kind of formulate my thoughts and just talk about episodes and stuff purely, I'd extrapolate from what I wrote in my notes and add my own words to it and stuff like that. I mean, technically what I put in my notes is in my own words anyway, but you get what I mean. So I'd already do that a little bit, but I do it even more so. There are some occasions where I might forget a character's name because I'm terrible with names. I've said that multiple times. I'll check my notes for it really quickly. It's kind of another thing too, kind of along those same lines that to anyone that doesn't know, I do edit the podcast, not heavily. They're probably the least edited things I do. Usually it's a situation of me cutting out dead space in audio. There are occasions where it's I'll say something or misspeak and I'm like, no. It's maybe I said something earlier in a podcast and later on when I'm talking, I'm like, oh, that's completely wrong. Rather than keeping it in, I might go back and cut it out. But a lot of times it's just gaps in audio where it's oh, here's a couple seconds of silence. Depending on how anal I get, sometimes I'm like, oh, there's 2 seconds of quiet there. Yeah, cut that out. It's a bad habit. But more often than not, it's if there's 5 seconds of space or something, typically I'll cut that out. But it really depends. And I also cut out a lot of my ums because I say a lot in those recordings. I'm sure you've noticed by now. It's a bad habit. It's kind of embarrassing to admit it because I know the moment I say that, you're going to be able to notice it every time. But it's it's whatever. It's very, very noticeable. Sometimes I cut them out. Other times I'm it's okay. But getting back to the whole recording process and everything, to me, to make sure I keep everything a lot fresher in my mind, I thought would be a lot more interesting is typically what I do is still doing the thing of I watch everything in a single night. To anyone that's curious about that, how I go about that whole situation is I DVR everything. For example, I'll give you a great example is Monday nights, at least specifically when I originally started the podcast, and obviously it kind of applied more recently and still kind of will apply, is Monday nights, for example, is at 8 o'clock, it's Supergirl and Gotham. What I would do is I would watch one and record the other. And obviously, usually, I watch everything in a set time. So it's at that time, say it was Supergirl, Gotham, Lucifer, and Timeless all coming on Monday night. So what I do is watch Supergirl while I'm record Gotham, watch Lucifer, then watch Timeless, and then go back and record all of them. Maybe then later that night, same night, watch Gotham and recorded my thoughts on it as well. Just the whole, that's kind of my whole formula for it. Because I like to do everything in a single night, because I try to get everything out the next day. If you might not have ever noticed that, but it's that's why another reason why I do them in audio, because they're a lot easier to kick out and put on YouTube. Because for one, they take a lot less, once again, editing. The export kind of takes a while just because they get very lengthy, and basically when I export them with my whole setup of the kind of laptop I use as well as editing software I use, both of which are very low grade, nothing special. It's something you may not know. I mean, I think it's something you might be able to notice, but typically I also upload everything amongst the podcast in a particular order as well. I will always do it Not Too Comic Book, Super-Fanta-Fi, and Crime Centric at respective times. Like typically Not Too Comic Book will typically be at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where Super-Fanta-Fi will typically be at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and Crime Centric will be at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, that once again, that also depends on like how many I'm covering that night. So if I'm not doing a Not Too Comic Book, everything moves up an hour. That's just how the whole process has always been for me. I think the main reason why I do it like that is because that's the initial order I created, you know, came up with the concept with each podcast. But kind of getting back to my whole process, I had to change things up because my biggest problem was because of the whole podcast thing, because of how long it takes and everything, I would typically be up until like 4 or 5 in the morning most times to get everything uploaded, like the titles, thumbnails, all that jazz. Like it would be until like 5 o'clock because it's everything. There's like 5 or 6 steps I have to go through before even getting to the uploading process. So it's a lengthy thing I have to go through before I can upload. So it still works, but like it would just, to me, I'd basically burn myself out by doing that. So more recently, probably like at the tail end of the first like large chunk of it, I started doing things differently in the sense of it's kind of where I stand currently is I continue to watch everything in a single night. I record everything, my thoughts and everything, and then on occasion, this is kind of flip-flop because this has actually kind of changed a little bit. Initially, I would save everything, all the editing, exporting, reformatting, and uploading, all that would be saved until the next day. Depending on the day, because it is summer right now, so I'm doing less things. Yes, I'm doing more things throughout the week, like currently at the time we were recording this, I'm doing something podcast related every single day. I'm talking about a TV show every day, but you know, they're very like, it's like at most there's 3 on Sundays and there are 3 on Fridays. Every other day is either 1 or 2. So it's a situation of like, okay, that's very manageable in the sense of like, so I can edit some things at night too, and then like, you know, export them, but do the reformatting and uploading the next day, so it won't, it'll take even less time. Like I said, that's kind of a time restraint thing to it, like depending on how long it takes me to get done with everything and how much I gotta cover. Like once fall starts rolling back in and like the TV schedule starts packing on, I'll probably go back to the other way. I don't know, we'll just kind of have to wait and see on that. But yeah, I mean, that's literally all there is to my whole process. And this is a pretty boring video, I know, but I you know, I've always kind of wanted to do a little more behind the scenes, just in case anyone's ever curious about letting you know how everything kind of works for me. Just kind of want to share that information with you. I don't know. Maybe someone might be, maybe someone was just like, oh, like how does that whole thing work for you? So, but really, that's all I want to talk about in this video. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.